Hello everyone, hi, Treason here, and yeah, it's nearly 2014 and I'm not really going to do anything really awesome to end the year. I've only got a few hours left to actually put this thing together. So what we're going to do is look at a machine that is responsible for a lot of DOS footage, or it will be. It actually hasn't had a chance to yet. You know, system overviews and that. Usually if I'm doing a system overview, the footage all comes off that system, but when I'm looking at games, usually it's running on just this one machine. So yeah, we're going to have a look at it. It's my Athlon machine, as I'm about to explain to you again. So yeah, duplicate information, what the fuck, who cares? That aside, we're going to look at an AMD Athlon XP 1500. It's a bit modern, but it replaced the Pentium 3, and it will be responsible for most DOS game footage seen on my channels, aside from system-specific videos, oddly such as this one, so this is the only one that is actually going to use footage from this machine. In system overviews, all footage is usually from the machine being focused on, unless stated otherwise, so this thing hasn't really been seen on this channel yet. It's in the same model of case as the dual Pentium 3. These were used by Golding Computer Services. It was a local company. To clarify, the Pentium 3 we replaced was the single socket 371. It lived in a metal foundry there. Not the dual processor one. The dual processor is still there, and it's not going away anytime soon. It's a good machine, that. The last time the single P3 was used is for the University's Toast review. I think I might have upset a few people with that video, but tough shit. DOSBox and your lack of effort isn't an excuse, dude. Sorry, but as DOSBox team's goal is to make an accurate emulator, there is a very real risk that your mod won't work there forever. It might break in the future. Wouldn't that suck? As a last note on that, I released some leftovers from a mod I was doing to Keen 4. I had drive failure on a machine, and so I've given away what I had left on a forum there. If you're interested, I'll leave a link. It's going to be difficult to get that machine out of there, but let's just look at the front of it for now. One unusual feature is the fact that it is one of the few machines to have a male name applied in the network configuration, that being Ricardo, the only others being Dave and Huey. Immediately noticeable is the 5.25-inch floppy drive, a 1.2 megabyte drive. You can read 360k disks in there, but I wouldn't recommend writing them with such a drive. That's installed for use with WinImage, as I make backups of disks or write new ones with this machine. People would generally refer to this kind of machine that you would use to aid an older machine being set up as a tweener. There is a Cd-Rom drive, and whilst it does only read CD-ROMs, it does have an ace up its sleeve. Notice there's 6 buttons and 6 LEDs. Well, this is a TIAC, or TEAC, not quite 100% sure on how to pronounce that, CD68E, CD changer. It uses a single IDE connection, but it shows up as 6 drives. It can't access all 6 at once, but it can change. Yes, you did hear me rightly, it is a CD changer. You can load or unload 6 disks in any order you wish. I dare take it to pieces to find out how it works, because it makes some very precise noises when operating, and those can only imply that taking it to bits would probably render it useless. It can only read CDs at 8 speeds, but it's a neat addition to a machine like this, and if you had a multi-disc adventure game that checked all the drives, you'd never have to swap the disks whilst playing. Presume it didn't exceed 6 disks. If it did, then maybe you'd need 2 of these. Also, it makes for a pretty neat piece of kit on the network, as I can share all the drives and load multiple CDs for a machine and just call their contents over the network without having to image or swap the disks. Of course, there's a regular 3.5-inch floppy drive. It can use floppy disks like any other 3.5-inch floppy drive. Inside are 2 Fujitsu 10GB hard drives, maybe a little small. These came from some old server, and they're enough for this machine. I really don't need anything more. They're not even close to being full. Fujitsu made some really good hard drives back then. Samsung's design used to look very, very similar, and they were of equal quality, making me kind of wonder if they were in fact the same thing, much like IBM and Hitachi Death Star drives were. But unlike the Death Star, these actually work really well. The motherboard is a Chaintech 7AJ-A2E one of their older, cheaper motherboards. It's based on a VIA Apollo KTE133 chipset. Rather common chipset. These had some compatibility issues with later CPUs, but otherwise were known as a good all-rounder. They weren't the fastest, but they were stable. They weren't the cheapest, but they came with enough features. The chipset generally did what it was intended to do. You can't really floor it for the compatibility issues mentioned either, as it was never designed to run CPUs that far in the future, and AMD hadn't published the future specifications at the time the chipset was made. Later chipsets came out for those CPUs such as the KT3, but this is a tangent and I'll get back on topic. It does seem though that Chaintech did make good Athlon boards, because I have a 7VJL and that works really well as well. Now it's in a proper case with a good power supply, it just needs a good graphics card putting in. Sorry, but I won't be taking the heatsink off this CPU. This one has an Athlon XP 1500 installed in it. It ID's a little funny and you can fiddle with the multiplier, so I suspect it might be a mobile processor, but I'm not really 100% on that. This board takes SD-RAM only, there's no support for DDR. It doesn't matter because for whatever reason a lot of the DDR boards seem to have compatibility problems with DOS. Maybe they were a little too new. They usually don't have ISA slots either. The only one I know of is some Pentium 4 motherboard that Supermicro made in the mid-2000s. The memory here totals 1GB. It's an ECC memory module, or they both are. It's the remaining 1GB from the dual Pentium 3, the original memory, before I replaced it with the non-ECC not long before it appeared in a video on this channel. Back on the subject of ISA, it does have that, this Athlon. It's got a single slot. I have a suspicion it's probably a PCI to ISA bridge, I really don't know. It works fine with the AW64 Gold though, and that's all I want it to do. AW64 Gold cards have a nasty secret that they're not telling you. It's really horrible, and that secret is that there is no real SP diff output. Only MIDI is outputted on that. It's useful for ripping game OSTs though, I suppose. In fact, it has been used for that. That's where the Duke Nukem 2 OST recording came from. You could easily add the SP diff jack to any AW64, even the value card, though the disadvantage there would be that they only have 512KB of RAM on board, and the Gold has 4MB. As well as if you were using the analog outputs, the Gold has a slightly better 20-bit digital to analog converter on board, apparently, but I haven't noticed any different in the components on the board, but I haven't actually looked that closely, so that's for you to inspect if you're curious about that. There's plenty of pictures of them on Google. The motherboard has a CMI 8738 on board, a sound chip made by C-Media. Those actually work in DOS with older drivers, provided the chip was made before a certain date, and you can actually buy them on a card relatively cheap. I think they still make it, but you probably don't want a brand new one, they're not guaranteed to work. Most features were software assisted on the DOS side though, so it's disabled aside from its MIDI output, because I like to have 32 channels on the MU90R. There is also a Yamaha SW1000XG, and these cards were never very good. It's a bit like an MU128 stuck to a card with its balls cut off. The MU128 and SW1000XG were inferior in my opinion to the earlier MU modules such as the 80 and 90, and of course my 90R. This card is not compatible with DOS, though it wouldn't be impossible to loop MIDI back into it from say the AW64 or the Roland that used to be in here. I only use it for testing XG MIDI files. Composing can't really be done that well, especially with the guitar patches, as they sound nothing alike. Much like the MT32, some of the bass patches also sound a little off-key to me sometimes, so I was never really sure what to make of this. As a last note on the MU128 type devices, I'm inclined to think Sega used either a 128 or an MU1000 for Sonic Adventure's soundtrack, the first game on the Dreamcast. It certainly sounds very Yamaha MU-ish, especially their synth brass. Go and give that a listen. The regular 3C905 Ethernet card is installed. I don't have a shortage of those in my inventory. Though, oddly with this one, I did wire the activity light to the front panel for convenience sake. Mostly because the Ethernet cable likes to fall out. I don't have a tag on that cable. Lastly, graphics. A GeForce 4 MX4000 card, a common card. Overall, mostly run-of-the-mill hardware in here. Does nothing special. There is an 8-speed card, but only 4 speeds supported by that AGP slot. I guess I should point out that the AMR modem is installed because nowhere I know of actually sold those back when that slot was around. It does seem to work and it sends audio to the C-Media chip. I believe it will send it to a card on the PCI slot if it's properly configured. The modem circuitry on the card is actually minimal because all the chips and such are actually installed in the North Bridge. The machine starts with this rather annoying Ben 10 antivirus notice. It's turned off, and I could likely hack that out, and if I couldn't, I'm sure I might be able to get someone else to do it, but I don't really care to because everything's working. I set up a boot menu as usual. This is where the template for almost every other machine with one came from, except for ones that existed before this. As you can see, lots of options to play with, though the titles are a little outdated now and they're no longer fully accurate because I've changed the functionality of it a little bit and can't be bothered to update those. The machine runs Windows 98 SE, though it has a custom boot screen that you can freely poke fun at me for. The machine has two main uses, playing games and composing, or listening to MIDI. Yeah, now you can hear how shit the MIDIs sounded for the Casio before they were actually played on the Casio. Also, Portamento isn't very well supported by Yamaha MU modules, and they have no mono mode, making that worse, meaning that whole Portamento bit in the last video we saw was written with no idea whether it was correct or not. I didn't know what it'd sound like until it played on the Casio. As a last note, I actually don't think the SW1000 supports Portamento at all, because it never seems to work with that. The SW1000XG causes BSODs or locks the machine sometimes, so it will probably come out soon. I have done a lot with that card over the years, so that's going to be a sad day, but I never really liked it, to be honest. Game-wise, it will run games from its time. All I really have is Duke Nukem Manhattan Project now, which, as you can see, runs well. It's in OpenGL mode because there's some kind of compatibility issue with this version of the drivers. I can't bother to change them. Where it does come into its own is in 3D or 2.5D DOS games. Blood, for example, runs incredibly well on this machine, and there's enough power and memory that we can actually afford to run most of these games from inside Windows in a DOS box, as they would call it. Duke 3D and other build engine games would also run very well, given that they're basically on the same code base, I suppose. I guess I can time demo 3 in Quake to give you an idea how this thing scales. That's good, eh? Yeah, runs a bit too fast actually, even when you're not time demoing. Remember the Socket 7 chips? Yeah, those don't really come close to this, do they? That Cyrix looks really pathetic now. Demo wise, it's as good as any system in its class. It runs Addicts preamply at incredibly high frame rates anyway, so I assume it would go quite a bit further than that. But I don't actually have any demos made after this one, and I really don't have any interest in the demo scene past the end of the 90s, to be honest. This is just a rare exception. I'm unsure if NSSI or Top Bench are even accurate on this machine. We're going to run them anyway, but the times in Top Bench I know for a fact are not accurate by this point. According to the author though, the score is pretty much correct. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Either way, it actually looks a bit crap at this 16-bit code. NSSI shows decent results though. Stands to reason 16-bit code is not what CPUs were being optimised for by this point. So I suppose we'll let it off for that low Top Bench score. And it is looking a bit disappointing in NSSI, given the CPU that's above it in the chart there. Well, this was an incredibly short one, but I had very limited time to work on it. Well, I have to admit, I don't think that was very interesting, but it's out the way now. Next year, yeah, we'll look at some more machines. We've had some real issues at the end of this year. My workstation has a failing chipset. My 4860X4 has gone and had a motherboard failure. My laptop's dead, and the Pentium 60 is dead. So now we're completely fucked on that, I think. Not good. Oh, and streaming's kinda out the window. Can't stream anymore. Can't do it. Internet's not good enough around. You have to be rich to stream now, apparently. So yeah, YouTube can kinda get it to work. So maybe I will at a later time, but it's going to be laggy. Yeah. Not really much more to say. Aside from, I do wish all my viewers an awesome new year. And next year we might look at some games consoles. I haven't looked at any consoles in ages. Maybe we can overview some of those, look at some games on them. Could be kind of fun. I don't know. And we'll redo some videos that I did years ago because they're a bit shit now, let's be honest. Although they're not going anywhere, I'll link to them. Anyway, I'm rambling. Yeah, have a good new year. I'm High Treason. I'll see you in 2014.